Are we on? Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. It's an open meeting and it is being recorded. Apologies, we've had two, Councillor Wilson, substituted by Councillor Alison Whelan, welcome. And at the last minute, Councillor Steve Corney has let us know that he's very well. And I'm hoping that Simon will join us, but meanwhile we are quorum. I'd like to welcome Judith Barker, who's the new, I had to write this down, a new Executive Director for Place and Connectivity, just joined, and she's interested in, as part of her learning about the CPCA, is listening to our business, so welcome. And of course we have the Chief Executive, thank you, and officers various. Okay, are there, members, are there any declarations of interest or conflict with items on the agenda? No, okay, thank you. So I've got two announcements. One is the recruitment timetable for the second independent person is progressing with the aim that the advert should go out in about mid-February with a closing date of mid-March. And the shortlisting will by the end of March and recruitment in April, hopefully. So we're on track at the moment for the next municipal year. So I suppose if you know anybody who isn't, or there's some restrictions, you can't be or have been a councillor of any level in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. But if you know other people who might be interested, you might point them and you think they might be worthwhile. And my second point is that I had a meeting with Councillor Elise Wilson, who's a member of the Independent Improvement Board. I think we had about an hour and a half, I think, discussing. This is just shortly into the new year on the 9th of January, just talking generally about how my perception of how things are going on an improvement point of view. I think it was part of the general attempt by the Improvement Board to consult with those who have a role to play. So I thought that was very helpful. Okay, so that's my announcements. I go to item 3, which are the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of November. Are we happy with the minutes as a record? Simon, welcome. You know, it's all right. Have you any declarations of interest? That's the bit you missed. No. Okay, good. That means, Mark, you can leave at midday and leave as quorum. Okay, so the minutes of the last meeting, are we happy with them as a record? Do we have any comments? I'd ask you to note the action log. I don't think there's anything I picked up there. Thank you. Right, so that takes us on to item 4, which is the Improvement Framework Report. And Angela Probert will take her place at the pointy end and introduce her paper. And our purpose this morning is all about noting progress and the recommendations and commenting as we see appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm at the pointy end and it feels a bit like that this morning. Chair, the report is the regular report that comes to this committee, and it asks you to note the progress over November and December, but also looking forward to note the proposed transition from where we are now in terms of what we might look at going forward, to note that we are reviewing the remit and focus for the Independent Improvement Board, and also for you to note the recent internal audit that has taken place on the project planning and delivery work stream. So that is the focus of the report for you this morning. And Chair, set out in the report is update on the overall improvement for the improvement plan, and as set out in paragraph 2.2, it is rated as green at the end of December, meaning that its successful delivery of the plan to time, to cost and quality appears to be highly likely. The following paragraphs set out the detail of what has been delivered over the last period, and also attached to the report is the regular high-right report that you receive that sets out the detail behind the statements and comments that are in those paragraphs. Chair, in paragraph 2.8 of the report, it sets out the approach to transition that I referred to earlier. It sets out that the chief executive has written to the external auditor, and a copy of that letter is attached for your noting as an appendix 2 to set out what progress has been made. It's also clear and it's sensible that we keep a focus on areas that haven't been delivered, but also to ensure that the progress that has been made, the significant progress that has been made, is embedded. So as we look at the transition plan, it's not just a stop, it's about looking at how we embed all the activity, the plans, the processes that have been agreed through the various committees and boards, so that that can be embedded. And as I've set out in the report, people recognise it as this is how we work around here. So it's a really key focus going forward for how we make sure the progress that's been made is embedded. During February, we will do some lessons learned. If you recall, we did that at the end of phase 1, so that we learn, that we embed that learning. And in March, we will bring back to this committee en route to the CA board what the focus for the activity is going forward. Chair, you've already referred that you have met Elise Wilson, so we continue to engage with the IIB on a formal and informal basis, and the last meeting took place of the IIB on the 16th of January. At that meeting, constituent chief executives attended and were able to share their observations, not only on progress made to date, but also to be involved in a discussion about developing the future vision and deepening devolution. And Chair, the note from the IIB has been circulated, I understand, to all members of this committee, either at the end of last week or the beginning of this week. I referred to the future focus for the IIB, the terms of reference that were agreed that the IIB has worked to. It is timely to review that. So it was part of the conversation at the meeting on the 16th of January. And over the next couple of weeks, we will review and send to the IIB a revised terms of reference. And we will bring that back here, Chair, en route to the CA board at its meeting on the 20th of March. And finally, just to set out that in paragraph 2.10, we put the detail behind the internal audit that has taken place that follows on from the positive internal audit on the governance work stream. So the audit opinion is set out that the board can take reasonable assurance that controls that the organisation relies on are suitably designed, consistently applied and effective. There are four management actions, 3 of those are low and 1 of those are medium, and we will focus on delivering against those recommendations. So Chair, that is what I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to build on the comments that Angela made, if I could, in relation to the letter that's appended to the report that Rob Bridge, our CEO, sent to the external auditor. My understanding, and of course external auditors are with us today online, Janet Dawson and Jacob McHugh, is that the detailed response to that will come as part of their annual audit report, which is still due to us and will come in the following months. However, they have pointed out on page 39 of the report that's with you today, the audit results report, that 3 of those areas that were raised, and I just thought it was worthwhile just mentioning those now, if I may, because they do link to improvement. The first of which is that they're comfortable that an appropriate independent investigation has been undertaken with appropriate findings in relation to the code of conduct. The second of which is that they are clear that the authority has worked hard to secure sufficient skills and expertise in place in its senior management team to fulfil those roles. And the third one is that they're comfortable that the controls the authority uses on its improvement programme to manage and monitor that improvement plan are suitably designed, consistently applied and effective. So I just thought I'd mention those as well as the responses we've had to date from external auditors. The external auditors themselves may wish to comment on that later in the meeting, but I thought since that linked particularly to the improvement programme and plan, it was worth mentioning now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Mark?
Yeah, a couple of questions on the partnership working. So one is you talk about, and it's useful the way you said it. It needs to be embedded before it becomes green. So my question is, how are you going to determine that? How are you going to measure whether that it is sufficiently embedded to turn it green? The other point I have, if I then look in the detail on page 30 and the IIB feedback on partnership working, it says the IIB felt there was scope in the member arena, for further work to build a framework and culture that promoted consensus-based approach to discussions and decisions. Is any action planned to address that point?
Thank you, Chair. I can start, and the Chief Executive might also want to comment on that. In terms of how will we know, which was your first question with regards to embedding, this is as we have been doing and will continue to seek feedback from partners, but also it will be judged and tested in the delivery of key projects and through our partnership working, whether that has enabled those to be delivered, but also the ability for us to access funding and how we work on both a regional and a national level. So there will be a number of indicators which will demonstrate the impact, but also the success on embedding and partnership. And I'll pass across to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Angela, and morning, committee. So just building on what Angela says, I mean, we have to recognise that as an organisation that will continue to improve, everything we do needs to embed, and everything we do needs to become the business as usual way of operating, and that takes time. It's not a sort of drop point of everything's perfect, and it never will be. But I think in terms of how, and I wanted to come on to the point around how members and the board, specifically the point you made about the Independent Improvement Board comments, is we are doing a lot of work in terms of the common ambition of the combined authority area and what devolution opportunities there could be for the region based on the new framework that was published in the autumn statement. And in fact, we have a session with the board today, this afternoon, to work together to find a common ground, and we will develop over the coming weeks and months how everyone works together. They don't have to agree on everything. They won't agree on everything, but there should be points of commonality that is the right ambition for all of the residents and businesses across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And I do know that the Independent Improvement Board will, over the coming months, meet with the board at various times to talk to them about that progress. So I think there are a number of things we will be doing over the coming months to strengthen and embed and to work together for the good of the residents and businesses across Cambridge and Peterborough.
Thank you, Chair. My first question, I've got 2 questions. The first one is around procurement, and I was just reading on page 23 about the need for staff to be trained in procurement, that they've had all had basic training. There's been some specialist organised. Could you help me with this? Because it's a commissioning organisation, the Combined Authority. I would have thought that procurement was really quite a key role. And I'm just wondering if I've misunderstood that, and that we've had a number of officers who have not adequately been trained in procurement, have been running procurement programmes as part of the commissioning, or whether it's simply updating, please.
Thank you. If I could just answer that question. It's as part of the wider procurement work stream, we felt it useful to ensure that everybody who previously had training, but there were some new members of staff who hadn't had training coming in. So we ensured that every single member of staff has basic procurement training and basic procurement understanding. And that has been compulsory. Everyone has undertaken that one. And then also those who are more involved in more complex procurements, or in terms of managing contracts, had specific and more detailed training as part of that as well. And that has now been undertaken as well. So it was trying to make sure that everyone in the organisation had at least a basic level of procurement training and knowledge, and those who required specialist knowledge had the same commonality and consistency of training in relation to those areas as well.
Thank you very much for the response. So we are confident that it's all working well. Actually, it's additional to what was already there. It struck me as a bit of a surprising comment to say you need to make sure everyone's trained in procurement, but that's, thank you. My second question, I think, is around page 29, the inability to recruit required analyst resource. I see that you say that you're going to a shared services model. Now, having experienced not wanting to stay in a shared services model, which is a consistent activity in Peterborough, I'm just wondering if that's going to be adequate long term, and are you looking to recruit a dedicated analyst resource to make sure that you can deliver everything according to what is needed? Just a little bit concerned about that shared resource bit at the end of that page. Item 4, page 29.
Yeah, my apologies. I was just working through there. I think the intent on this one is that we incur a lot of difficulty sometimes finding specialist staff in specialist areas to be able to actually undertake the work, and data analyst is one of those. That we have. And what we're looking to do effectively is to try and get resource that we can share across the organisation, different directorates and different parts of the organisation working on that one, and looking where possible to work with our colleagues and constituent councils as well, where there is scarce resource, which then is best utilised for the people and communities of Cambridge and Peterborough on a wider basis. So we're looking at different models to enable us to do that, particularly in those areas, I say, where there is scarcity of resource, and the market is incredibly difficult to get good quality candidates coming through.
Thank you. My point of the question, I suppose, is are you considering training up from within, finding an individual that you can develop this level, because you're depending on other people to deliver a service which maybe would be more benefit being dedicated?
Thank you. Yes, if I may respond to that, in a whole set of areas, including this one, we're looking at developing our own. We're looking at increasing use of apprenticeships in a number of different areas as well to help to bring new talent through and to help to develop that. And this is one of the areas where we'll look at that as well. So I can, yeah, absolutely come to
that. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, having read through the report, very good, and noted the statements and comments here. I had a couple of questions around section 2.7 on confidence, culture and capacity. So knowing that that's a very important thing that has been concentrated on here. Under the section on values and behaviours, it talks about the new approach to campaigns and engagement being used. I just wonder if you could explain how that's being used in the context of values and behaviours and how that is being measured. That's the first question that I have. Is it, should we just do one at a time, or okay? In the bulk document, it's on page 11, and it's section 2.7, and it's one on values and behaviours. It's the second statement. It's basically the last sentence in that.
Yes, thank you. It's what we're doing there is, as part of our recruitment campaigns, ensuring that we're clear about the type of values and behaviours that we're seeking from new people coming in to join the organisation. And we've also designed a set of interview processes that are also built around questions, as well as looking at experience of individuals, also tries to understand how that's been done in the past, so the values and behaviours they bring are hopefully aligned to those of the combined authority in relation to things like partnership working, innovation, integrity, etc. So that's what we've been doing through there in terms of the HR work.
And yeah, the other question is that on the. Well,
I just think, just to add, as part of our appraisal process with all staff, which obviously would look at objectives that people should be delivering. Equally, we'll look at the values and behaviours under a framework to understand and coach and mentor and support people to start to, if they're not, showing the values of the organisation, which are important to us to continue the point around embedding and how we are as an organisation.
yeah, and the second question I had, I'll just wait for this to come up again here, is on the next section around recruitment and hang on a minute, is it there? Recruitment and retention. Yeah, again, the second statement in there said about mid-year reviews for staff have been completed. Then it goes on to say that encouraging with 90% of reviews currently confirmed as completed. I just wonder if you could explain the difference in those statements, or what it means, how far we are completed.
Give a go first.
Thank you, as a person with executive responsibility within the management team for HR, I actually know the answer to that. I'm happy to cover it. We know that all of the conversations have taken place and all of the appraisals have actually been done. We're still just waiting for some finalised paperwork, which need to be signed by the individual and by the manager as well to come back. We've chased those through. We know the conversations talking about them have been done. It's simply a matter of process coming in now. I believe, because this report was written a little while ago, that figure is higher again now, and it's simply a matter of one or two we're awaiting to come back.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that the employee engagement was something that was very, very important. It was very, very focused on in there. The only other point I'd like to sort of make, again, the thing we've been asked to sort of note the statements in here, the transformation looks like it's very, very good progress in there. I think having been involved in many, many transformations, we go through the three phases of what they call the forming, storming, and norming, and this feels like we're in that second half of the storming phase here as well. There, so again, I appreciate the comments about bringing this into BAU when we get into the norming phase as well there. So great progress. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Chair? Yep. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Mark raised. This is the point on page 30 about the scope in the member arena for my computer's just gone off, so I scope in the member arena for further work to build a framework and culture, promoting a consensus-based approach to discussion and decisions. And the chief executive gave a very elegant answer to that, which was the need to identify areas of common ground as the basis for discussion and decision making. And on page 9, there's a reference to a need for a safe space, which suggests that there are dangerous spaces in the organisation, possibly, to agree joint purpose and focus. And I think this is absolutely a crucial point that needs to be resolved, because we all know that this is a very contested political environment, febrile environment at times, and it is not serving the best, it's not delivering the best outcomes that could be possible for our communities. I think we need that consensus, and we need deliberative decision making in this organisation, and the sooner we get there, the better. And I think we need to highlight this, and it's important to making sure that this organisation delivers the best for our communities.
So thank you, Councillor Smith. I don't disagree. I think the wording is around what you see as how more mature and progressive mayoral combined authorities operate in other parts of the country, where there will, I'm sure, be disagreements and different viewpoints. But the safe space point is that those types of challenging conversations take place, not in the public arena, to then find the common ground, to then ensure most of the time, and I think there has to be acceptance that sometimes in meetings there will be challenge and question of the mayor or some of the policy ideas or thoughts. I think that's wholly appropriate. But what that is about us, and this is part of what the improvement board wants to see, is more time for the board to develop together their common purpose, their common vision, and hopefully get to a point that when they then present that publicly, that is something they're all signed up to. So that's what we're working through. But I can appreciate that sometimes, the politics also will need to be demonstrated, because we are a democratic and political organisation, and it would be naive and inappropriate to suggest that that won't happen and shouldn't happen.
So I think what I'm also very encouraged to see is that there is a review of the scrutiny role, and I've been on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and it was clearly not really functioning as um, a fulfilling a proper scrutiny role, in my view. It was receiving huge agenda papers only a few days in advance of board meetings, and there was no real scope to do in-depth pre-scrutiny work. I'm not even sure it does that much in the way of post-decision scrutiny as well. And I think that if the energy of opposition and challenge can be channeled through a supported scrutiny function, then that might take quite a lot of the heat out of some of the more contested environments. And my view is that strong scrutiny from opposition parties is a very, very effective tool to have if you want the best possible governance in an organisation. So I'd also like to see how that work is progressed and that it's properly resourced when you come to your conclusions.
Thank you. Yes, it's a really good point, and it's one they've been working hard on over the course of the last few months. We've had agreement from Overview and Scrutiny Committee to actually change its mechanism and the way it operates, bringing in a new role called a rapporteur, which effectively is an individual who has a very strong link directly to the thematic committees and relevant thematic committees that they work about, and then brings that information back to Overview and Scrutiny. We've also worked very strongly looking at the forward plan and how they look at that to enable them to do both pre-scrutiny if they wish to, as well as linking to post-scrutiny through there. We're taking a report back to the March Review and Scrutiny Committee in terms of resources that will be required to support their new mode of operation as well. And therefore, an awful lot of work is happening to try and make sure that Overview and Scrutiny continues its development to be as effective as it possibly can be. And in fact, some of the work we've now been doing is seen as best practice by the National Centre for Governance and Scrutiny in terms of male combined authorities. So we are starting to make sure that we're not just following, we're now seen as leading in some of those areas. Hopefully that gives you a sense in terms of the work we're doing. Happy to give you more detail around that outside the meeting, or to provide a note to other committee members if you would like. There's a lot of work going on in that area.
Thank you, Chair. It just occurred to me that one of the things that might sort of impede the process of embedding would be a sort of high churn of sort of temporary and agency staff. And I just wondered, sort of, and I'm sorry if the answer is in the paper somewhere, where we're at on that, and what the direction of travel is. And I suppose, I mean, it's also been in the paper in relation to the NHS. It's quite an additional cost having too many places filled by agency staff. Just wondered if you give us some idea of, in percentage terms, how many of our staff are temporary in that way. Thank you.
Okay. I can't unfortunately give you an absolute up to the minute data, but the last time we looked at this, which was at the end of the last calendar year, so less than a month ago, and just to put it into context, the level of agency staff had been up to higher than 30% at one stage in the organisation, going back about 12 to 18 months. We're now running around about 15 or 16%, which is significantly lower. I mean, any organisation always has some interim staff requirements because it's not always possible to actually get people recruited in the timescale you want, or indeed if people are doing simply temporary work or working on a fixed term project, it's often better to have interim staff doing that. But it has significantly come down, and we are monitoring it on a very regular basis.
Thank you. That's encouraging.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, the Chief Exec wants to comment.
Yeah, I just want to. I think there's another point. I think one of the things we talked about values and culture of the organisation and the reputation of the organisation. So to secure permanent staff rather than interims, our reputation and what people think about maybe coming and joining the combined authority is really, really important. And I think we have seen a change. So just as there was one post a few weeks ago that we advertised, we had 100 applications. I don't think we were getting that level of interest in roles previously. So I do think people can see by what we're doing and how we help explain what the organization is about, what it is like to work for us, what it is like from a cultural point of view. We're starting to see an improvement, so we can even reduce that further. And we've got some really helpful and good interims who've helped the journey in the last 18 months. But of course, having that stability and people who see a long-term future in the organization does help strengthen how we operate.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's the longest discussion we've had on this item since we began. So I don't know whether it was something that happened at Christmas, or is it the fact that we've reached a stage where we can see what we're talking about, which engages our brains more than there's 1,000 things for Angela and colleagues to do. I think we should welcome the progress today and the candour in which the recognition that this is a long haul in the embedding process. And it struck me and I was very pleased to hear that you're doing some more work with the board, because having observed the whole of the meeting prior to Christmas, I don't think it was sending the signals that would make other people watching from a distance that this was a cohesive way of debating and discussing things, putting the contentious item to one side. So I was hoping that, because it seems to me that is a litmus test, is when you can watch the board in action and feel that they are a collective with an overwhelming single purpose for Cambridge and Peterborough, allowing the difference of opinions to be debated in a way that's not quite as spiky as I observed before Christmas. But so in the next update, to have some further thoughts, particularly on the culture at the board level, I think would be helpful to members. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Angela. Now we have Chris Bolton, who's going to introduce in item 5 the corporate risk register. And I was saying to him just before we started that we've moved from a sea of red to a sort of orange vista. But I think he's going to start with an apology before he takes us through it. And our role is to note throughout.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, to start with an apology. You'll see in Appendix 3, there's an error. There's a net zero risk that's been included, number 1122, and it shouldn't have been included. So apologies for that. It wasn't part of the risk register. Okay, well, lovely to see you again, and good morning. So this is our sort of bi-monthly update with regards to the risk register, the work that we're doing implementing the framework and following the process. So today we'll look at the refreshed risk register, the dashboard and the heat map in your appendix 1 till 3. We'll talk about the progress of the implementation of the risk software. So we know that we use it for corporate level. We're now looking at a program level as well, or a service level. And also we'll talk about the corporate management team risk reviews as well, which was one of the risk internal audit actions. Okay, if we start with the December risk register, we've got 16 residual risks. So residual risks are the risks that have mitigations in place. So after they've been looked at for likelihood and severity and scored. We don't have any high risk red risks, as Chair noted. I think that's down to a lot of the work that we've put in. We've strengthened some of the definitions around the risk, particularly on financial scoring matrix. There's 2 amber risks, 13 medium risks and 1 low risk. Of the 16 residual risks listed, 4 relate to the improvement programme that we were just talking about a moment ago, and are likely to change given that the programme should be finishing relatively soon. The direction of travel of risks has not changed, and as I mentioned, the improved trend is down to a thorough review of risks and strengthening of some of the controls. With regards to the implementation of the risk software, we purchased the software back in May. It's been implemented at a corporate level, so now we have a central platform. It's auditable, so anyone who has access to it, you can see who's been using the platform. Hopefully it's increased sort of visibility at corporate level. We've spoken about that in previous reports. Now what we've done is taken it and expanded its use down to a corporate level, so a service level, things like the transport service or business or skills. So we've had the initial meetings with the areas, and then we're going to follow that up with dedicated training for all program and project managers, so they're comfortable in its use. So again, it would help the service areas in how they're looking at risk, how they're dealing with risk, and of course it has all the normal, reminders as part of the program and its use. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the internal audit action around making sure that risk is visible at a corporate management team level. So now we've kicked off those sessions. The first one was back on Monday. So now we make sure that not only do we look at corporate risks, in particular at a performance of risk meeting that we have with Nick and the PMO team. Also, we look at the risks as part of our monthly performance management meetings with different areas. We're also now looking at CMT, so they have real visibility over all the corporate risks. Of course, we'll have training for any of the CMT members that feel they need sort of training. Remember, a lot of the CMT members are the risk owners. We were talking some of the improvement ones earlier, so they'll probably sit with Nick or Rob. Just a quick aside with regards to the use of the software. Last committee, we were talking about the need for potentially using some sort of auditable tool to make sure that people have looked at policies. So anyone who's working for the combined authority can have a look at their HR policies or code of conduct policies. And again, it's recorded and it's auditable once they've actually done that. So again, we're rolling that out with HR, and you'll know the next item on the agenda, we're also using this software to record our internal audit actions. So you'll see across a number of areas, we're really trying to improve, the information that we're collecting across the piece, making sure that the correct processes are followed, be it risk, be it internal audit, be it to do with the policies. One other point I'd like to make was around making sure that there's visibility at board level for corporate risks. And we know it was on the forward plan previously and sort of disappeared. We've made sure that it's back on the forward plan. So we'll be going every quarter as part of the performance management report. So it'll be a performance and risk performance management report that will go before board.
Thank you very much. Comments? Questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I was always told when you look at the risk register and nothing has moved, there's probably a reason for it. I'm just wondering if you're confident it's just because of timing or whether there are particular issues that are just stuck and we should be keeping an eye on them.
Well, it's a really good question because that's exactly what I thought. I was thinking, really? Have they really not moved at all? And of course, the PMOs sit down with the risk owners every month and go through the risks. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of them are, the 4 of them, a good chunk of them are related to the improvement program. So we're waiting on some decisions before we can go back. Other ones that came out in sort of conversation was particularly around the buses and passenger transport. But until there's a decision made as to how the service is going to be delivered, then we could look at the risks. So we've been having the discussions, but we felt actually it's for December at least, there hasn't really been any movement. But I'd expect that to change given some of the decisions that are coming up.
That's the shame of holidays, isn't it? Unfortunately, but thank you. Thanks very much.
Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Well, in a similar theme, really, it just occurred to me that I suppose when, as hopefully you are, in a period where some of the risks are tending to fall, you're in a position where you can say, yes, looking back on, say, the last quarter, things have improved, therefore we can, reduce, say, from a red to an amber. But I suppose to be useful, in the other direction, if a new risk suddenly appears, for this to be useful, it has to kind of almost be there in front of us very quickly. But then in that situation, you can't sort of, you can't look backwards and say, because then it might be too late to mitigate the risk. I just wondered how that's handled.
Well, I mentioned earlier some of the sort of forums where we discuss risk. So we discuss them monthly, sort of within the performance and resources team, resources and performance, wrong way around. At CMT level as well, we have the sort of monthly normal project management monthly meetings where we go through highlight reports, including risk. Now, if there's something left field, there might be something from central government, new policies come out. We don't sort of sit on our laurels or wait for that meeting. It will be a case that we're proactively, as a programme office, contact the relevant ED and have that discussion. And fortunately, we're getting to a place, as I mentioned earlier, around, say, the bus passenger transport decisions, where the EDs are coming to the programme office now. So we're getting the start of that culture where people have just, they've got risks in their mind. They're happy to have that discussion, and they're instigating it. So we're not chasing them; they're coming to us. So we try to sort of cover all areas.
Yeah, thank you. Just building on what Chris has said, and also the fact that at CMT, Corporate Management Team, we're regularly reviewing the risks. The other thing we're doing, of course, there is horizon scanning on a regular basis and looking for those areas and those issues that may become risks in the future. So effectively what we've got is a bottom-up approach, which is the service is looking at their risks and feeding those up, and they become strategic where required. Together with CMT, doing that horizon scanning about changes in potential policy or things that might be happening externally that may then become a risk to us in the future, and we feed that in as well. So it's a combination of those that enable us to rapidly identify if there's any particular emerging risk and then feed this in. I think it's simply an issue in terms of the point of time, which I think was covered previously during the month of December and early January. There wasn't an awful lot of change in relation to those risks, but I'm sure there would like to be over the course of this year, and we will make sure they're reflected in the risk register and brought to this committee on a regular basis as we do.
Okay, my go. we were worried before we had too many reds, and now we have. I'm not sure what you do with yellow and amber, what colour that makes. Not purple, but it might be something. So there was a shortage of confidence on the scattergun approach of red everywhere. How can we have confidence that it hasn't been in one bound Jack was free and just re-altered the scoring mechanism as opposed to putting them in the right order?
I suppose first comment is you're very hard to please, Chair. What I would say to the committee is that have faith in the work that we're doing. You know, we've talked about the training that underpins everything. We've talked about the frameworks and the process. So we've got that design bit, okay, and we had that recent sort of internal risk audit and design. So you know, we were it was a positive what's the word, assessment or measure. It's the compliance bit that we're making progress with at the moment. So you know, we're very serious about this. You know, I know I'm being quite flippant there, you know, answering the question. But it's important that we make sure that risk is part of all the things that we're supporting with the delivery of all the projects. And that's not to say, you know, we need to create a massive industry out of it, but it's important that it's, you know, that culture is embedded. So we do take it seriously, but we underpin all that with the training, you know, with the embedding. So to give you, you know, and the committee assurance, I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. I think we're moving into that embedding piece now. So I think that's probably the answer to my question.
Thank you. I must have never ridden a horse in my life, so I just I'll do my best. Thank you. Just building on what Chris said there as well. The other thing to bear in mind is, of course, the strategic risk register very much drives the internal audit review and plan for the year, and therefore, if this is working effectively, what this committee should see in the future is more of those internal audits coming back with reasonable or full assurance, because it effectively means we're identifying the risk at an early stage and effectively managing the risk down. And therefore, again, that will be something I think for this committee to monitor in the future in terms of this shouldn't be a standalone, the risk register. It really is a driver for that internal audit work. And we'll be bringing back to, I think, the March meeting, the draft internal audit programme for the following municipal year. So again, this should link into that. And the results of that should show again and demonstrate how effective we're being at managing and monitoring those risks coming through.
You did all right without the horse. Simon wanted to say.
I think it would be helpful. Please disagree with me if you object, but to basically have a case study. So, how a risk was identified, what was done, what were the controls put in place, what was its journey that helps us understand why it was red, what legitimized amber, and then it was green and it was dealt with. I think that would shine a light on what is just basically a set of illustrations and summaries.
Well, I was just saying, we did have one attempt with finance, which made him think in a different way. Is this a sort of development issue or something that you could bring to us easily for a meeting? Nick wanted to comment.
And it's working great. Yes, thank you. I think it's spot on, and hopefully the deep dives we talked about previously will bring those to light, as the chair rightly said. We did a deep dive on finance now a couple of meetings ago, and that helped. I know certainly my colleague here, Rob Emery on my left, think differently about that finance risk from some of the challenges and issues that were raised as part of that. And we're very happy to bring back further deep dives into other risk areas and to bring those to life in the future about why we chose them as initial risk, why they then moved down, the work that was done, and actually also to get the input from this committee about some of its thinking, which can help us as well in terms of framing those in the future. So perhaps, Chair, if we could bring forward to the next committee a list of what those deep dives might be and when you might undertake them, I think that might be useful for this committee to to start to think it through. And hopefully that builds on the point that you've raised.
Apart from driving the risk register, it should also focus management's or the organisation's minds on the thing. So can you tell me, without looking, what the top 3 risks are for the CPCA at the moment?
Yes, I'm going to go with future funding, future viability of the organisation. And I'm struggling on the third one, I'm afraid, Chair.
I've put you on the spot there, but I mean, to my mind, my experience of this, that if people can articulate that they know that these are the big things facing the organisation, that helps the day-to-day. So I'd ask you to maybe weave that into your proselytising. And my last point, before we move on, is given the conversations earlier, reputation was mentioned. It doesn't appear as a risk. Viability appears as a risk. But I just wonder whether officers would like to think about whether reputation, because in the end, it's what people think of us that makes us a good place and gets the shower of gold that we want from Whitehall. So whether it can be folded in or is something extra, I just ask you to think about it.
If I may just briefly respond to that, I think it's a really, really good challenge through that. I think reputation is implicit in some of the things that we do around workforce and HR, around finance, etc. But I agree that perhaps we could make it more explicit, and I'll work with Chris in relation to looking at that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I'll look forward to next time. But very much encouraged by what you've managed to achieve with you and your colleagues. Thank you. So I'm not being grumpy. Okay, item 6 then is the internal audit tracker. And Nathan, I said in my notes you were going to be on the screen, but it's even better to see you here. I don't think you've come to us before, have you, Nathan?
Good morning, everyone. So I was here in July, but I was not in person. So it's good to see you all face to face. You're absolutely right. I was supposed to be dialing in and made a last minute decision to come in person. So it's really good to be here. So this is item 6. The purpose of this report is to provide a progress update on the internal audit actions. So please see Appendix 1 for the internal audit tracker dashboard, which has been produced in our new 4Action software, which is linked to the 4Risk software that Chris mentioned in the previous item. So the headlines from Appendix 1 are that we have 13 open actions. 2 are categorized as high risk, 8 medium, and 3 low. And of those 13 actions, 6 are overdue, in that the original deadline that we agreed with RSM in the respective audits has passed. On the next page, you'll see a table showing the actions in full. And in the report itself at 2.1, we've offered a progress update on where we are in resolving those 6 overdue actions. So since I was last here in July, virtually, the number of outstanding actions has risen from 4 to 6. However, it's important to note that since July, 4 new audits have been approved, and with that 18 new actions. Therefore, progress is being made, but we still continue to strive for no overdue actions. We believe that the full rollout of 4Risk, once training has taken place with the action owners in the next couple of months, will improve reporting as actions will become more easily accessible to action owners. It will be easier for them to update on progress with automatic chaser emails. So yeah, thank you for your time, and please let me know if you've got any questions.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Nick Bell wants to say something first.
Thank you. I thought it may be useful for the committee just to briefly work through the 6 items and just to make you aware of why they remain outstanding on those. I'll cover the first 3 if I may, and then my colleague to my left, Rob Emery, will cover the remaining 3 in relation to that. The subsidiary company governance one is simply down to one of our subsidiaries. Every other one is complied in terms of business plans. The one subsidiary that's outstanding relates to the Peterborough property company that deals with the second building on the Peterborough University campus. And the reason for that is that there is a private sector shareholder involved then. We're waiting for finalisation in relation to that private sector shareholders shareholding moving forwards before we can finalise the business plan. We anticipate that will be done within the next month or two. On the Net Zero Hub governance, just to make you aware that the initial reviews were undertaken actually last year. However, we haven't been able to finalise the reviews this year because, as many of you may be aware, the situation is changing in regard to local enterprise partnerships across the UK. And our board is currently made up of local enterprise partnership representatives. Local enterprise partnerships have been abolished by the government from the 31st of March this year, and their responsibilities flowing back into local authorities. So we're simply waiting for final notification from those local enterprise partnerships as to which local authorities will pick up their responsibilities in the future before we finalise both the review of the Constitution this year for the Net Zero Hub governance and also the accountable body agreements. Both of those will be in place by April this year. I just want to cover those. If maybe perhaps, Chair, if I could briefly cover and ask Rob to briefly cover the others, then you have full visibility.
Thank you. So there are two on from the IT general controls audit. The first is around the risk of levers not being correctly identified. That process has been developed between the HR and the IT teams and has already been implemented as of today's date, although it was not for the audit update. There's still progression on that and making sure it's embedded and followed by all managers across the organization, as with any process, but the process itself has been established. On the access levels, this is actually two sort of sub-actions, one associated with Teams, which is how we store all our files, and it's making sure that the right people have access to the right things, whereas historically, most files have been available to all with a few specific areas for things like HR and finance. This is moving to a more restricted team, individual area-based filing system so that you can't just look at another area's files by default. That is done across over 90% of the organisation now, with I think 3 teams left to migrate to the new process. On the access review process, so this is, just double check, get this right. So this is just reviewing who has access to what. That process has now been established and has been sent over for implementation over the next month. The final risk on there is around treasury management and accounts payable and writing the process notes for this. This was considered low because as it currently stands, only 2 officers have day-to-day responsibilities for this, and it's myself and the senior technical accountant who write the treasury management strategy, which is on your agenda today. So this control is about future-proofing for if and when the finance function expands and less senior officers are involved. I can tell you that by the end of next week, it will be done well before we significantly increase the number of people I get to do my work for me.
Thanks very much. Now questions, Mark?
Yeah, so it is in response to these overdue actions, because I think there's a clear reason stated as to why the action hasn't been closed and a date by which it will be closed. I'll pick on the 2 IT ones, because if I read them, it's like maybe I'm paraphrasing and misunderstanding, but it's like it reads like as if we just didn't get it done in time, and it will be done soon. So I don't know why it wasn't done by the original target date, and I don't know when it's actually going to be finished.
Thank you. I think that's an entirely fair criticism, and I'll speak with the IT team and we'll make sure that those, well, hopefully they'll be closed and never come up again, but in future ensure there's more detail in that commentary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And it's one for you, I think, for the subsidiary company governance. I do understand the PropCo 2 issues, so I don't need to ask any questions about that. I think it's a more broad question. The challenges from CIPRA about subsidiary companies and all local authorities has been very well written about and very well understood. We look at our risk register and we're at green on these. Is company the right way to be going? Subsidiary companies the right way to be going, considering what CIPRA is saying about them? And in terms of the shareholder cabinet, how confident are you that that process will actually give the sort of oversight that's required?
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that in terms of the subsidiary companies, we're actually going to a position where we're reducing the number of subsidiary companies. So over the course of this last year, we've already struck off, effectively written down 2 existing companies because they were dormant. We now have 3 existing active subsidiary companies, 2 of which relate to Peterborough University and the development of that, and the development of various buildings in there. And the third of which is our Growth Co, which has historically managed the contract to help develop business support and also much of our skills work. That's now come to an end and is being brought back in-house, and we're looking to see what the future of that particular subsidiary company may be. It may well be that we decide to potentially cease trading on that one as well in the future, which would only then leave us with the 2 propcos. So absolutely, I think narrowing this down and taking a strategic view, which we have, that we will only set up companies where there is a clear undoubted rationale that one should be set up and we can't do it any other way, which I think links very strongly to the sit for guidance and advice around here is definitely the direction of travel. And hopefully it's useful that we've now started to narrow those down. In terms of the shareholder board, that's already started to become effective in terms of managing the shareholder meeting. It's been set up now, I think, over the course of the last 5 or 6 months. I'm sure that the monitoring officer can comment. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was constructed, but also it's morphing into a new entity as well, because we're now changing that from being the shareholder board into the investment committee for the organisation, which will have a strong link, not just looking at our shareholding in subsidiary companies, but also looking at the key investments we want to make in the future through our single assurance framework.
Okay, thank you very much. When I was on the other side of the fence, the art of dealing with these recommendations from auditors was to choose a date which management could deliver to, whereas some people would be too optimistic. So to what extent are these slippages because the date was too ambitious, and to what extent are the slippages because of unexpected events?
Probably working individually, if I worked through the first 3 of these, the first of them was an unexpected event, which is sorting out the shareholder issue in terms of the second property company. The 2 in relation to the net zero hub governance, to be perfectly honest, I think we just picked the wrong dates at the time. Actually, it should have looked at 24 because this is a key time when actually we're having that changes coming through from the LEP work. We've already got the constitution in place. It's been reviewed on a regular basis. This is about those changes that we need to make because local enterprise partnerships are ceasing, and we can't do that until we're notified by the local authorities as to which ones would take the responsibility on. So I think that was simply one of actually picking at the time, probably picking the wrong implementation date. Do you want to talk about the IT controls?
Yes, I think the 2 IT controls are probably just slightly optimistic timing. Both should be implemented over the course of the next month. And so I think people were just a bit hopeful about Christmas and how much could get done over that period. On the Treasury Management Framework, if I'm perfectly honest, that's been delayed due to the audit of the accounts and the MTFP falling at the same time of year. Normally they're separated by about 6 months, and that allows for focus to be given to other things such as process notes in between them. Due to the extended nature of the 21-22 audits, that's taken capacity, which would otherwise have been able to deliver that in the time planned.
Thank you. So I think we would encourage realism in the setting of the dates, and that when we make future reports, indicates the new timeline, because I noticed also there's no timing in your analysis, and indicates whether we're dealing with unexpected or it was an over-optimism on the dates, because it's important these things are followed through, but it needs to be realistic. At the moment, members, we're due to see this report annually, which is what we agreed hitherto. Are we content to stick with that January next year? Yeah. Okay. So we'll stick with an annual report. And thank you for presenting the paper. And this is an insight which we haven't had before, and it's very useful. Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. Right. So now we go to item 7, when we, I think, have Janet Dawson and Jacob McHugh.
Good morning, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Excellent, good.
Okay, and our job this morning is to, from an audit point of, from a committee point of view, is to note the report. So if you'd like to introduce, be very kind. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. And just to introduce myself, I'm Janet Dawson. I'm a partner within our government and public services practice. You'll know Jacob as the senior manager who's been involved in the audit, and also Mark Hodgson, who is the partner who started this audit. We reassessed the risk associated with it during 21-22 as a result of the significant weaknesses that we had identified. And so I was brought on as an equity partner to lead the audit and support both Mark and Jacob. So hence my appearance suddenly, and I will be the person who provides the audit opinion for the 21-22 audit. So as we reported to the last committee in November, there were a number of areas of the audit for 21-22 outstanding, but we were also awaiting the final position on the investigation that was underway so that we could reflect that in our work as well and ensure that we were satisfied as to how that had been carried out. So this report in front of you now presents the final position on that 21-22 audit, both in terms of the financial statements and also our conclusions on the value for money arrangements that were in place up to the 31st of March 2022. You'll see on page 5 that there are a small number of final procedures. Those are very standard at this stage in the audit, but we do anticipate, once you have approved the accounts, that we will issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, but we will report exceptions on the value for money arrangements associated with the weaknesses in governance to do with the culture, behaviour, senior vacancies, as we've already intimated to the organisation, and also in relation to oversight of subsidiaries. Now, just to pick up on Nick's point about our commentary on page 39 about progress that has been made subsequent to the period that we're reporting on, we will indeed be preparing our annual auditor's report, which is the public record of the work that we've done to date. And in that, we have more flexibility to provide an up-to-date position as to the progress that the organisation has made in terms of improvements in those areas of weakness. And we do anticipate doing that within the next month or so to share with the organisation. So I know that officers were slightly disappointed that this report doesn't go further in commenting on those improvements that are underway. However, this report reports only on our 21-22 responsibilities, and that's why you've got that difference. But what I would do is just take the opportunity to say we have seen some significant improvements in the way in which the organisation manages its governance arrangements. We've alluded to those on page 39, and we will go further in our annual auditor's report. So what this report also does is give you the draft audit opinion and report in full in section, I think it's section 3. So you'll see the proposed wording around those significant weaknesses. And I think that's the first time that we've shared that with you in that form. So I think it's important for the committee to pay attention to that. I'm going to stop there. Happy to take any questions, and Jacob will come in on any particular technical or detailed points that you have.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We have a stunned silence.
Fabulous.
Nick is going to say something.
Okay.
Thank you. So just for the record, I just wanted to note as well. I mean, thank you very much for the comment, Janet, but also in relation to the particular additional area of weaknesses being identified for 21-22, which was in relation to governance of subsidiary companies. Just to make the committee aware, as I'm sure you will recall, as part of the internal audit report you received in June 2023, update to this committee, we did a follow-up review of that, which then moved to reasonable assurance at that stage. But again, this information, much of it is historic, related to 21-22, and certainly the weakness was there in 21-22. But just again to reiterate, and I'm sure as we picked up as part of the annual auditor's report that Janet mentioned, that issue has been addressed. We now have a reasonable assurance for internal audit from that one. Thank you.
you have a pause for comments now from colleagues. Andy?
Thank you. It's just to be brief. It is so historic now that anything I might want to have said, I probably would have said a year ago. So it's just thank you very much for completing it and providing it to us in this draft form, because it's good to see it written down. But I think it probably would be unnecessary to comment any further on the content, as we've covered this over the years, haven't we? So thank you very much.
I think you probably sum up the position that's in our minds. Our next meeting is in the beginning of March. Are we going to have an answer before? You're confident we'll have an answer before then to close off this piece of history?
That is our intention. Yes, absolutely. So Jacob and I will be drafting furiously to get that ready for officers to review, so that we can get it into the 8th of March.
Okay, and with this timing difference, I mean, this is to 22, then we've got from 22 to 23.
Yes.
What's the prognosis on the subsequent years in timing?
So the issue for us is, obviously we have to report about arrangements up to 31st March 23, and clearly a lot of action was underway at that point. And I think the question for us is to take that step back and say, was there sufficient attention being paid to the areas of weakness, and were the arrangements in place sufficient to begin to address them, regardless of whether or not they were fully implemented? I think we're looking to see what the intention and action of the organisation was, and whether we're sufficiently satisfied that therefore the significant weakness was being addressed appropriately. And then clearly we've then got the period through 23-24 where we would similarly be looking at arrangements and processes and actions being taken. So it becomes a much finer judgment as you're working through your improvement programme, as to our view as to whether or not that's sufficient to have mitigated that significant weakness sufficiently for us to give you a clean opinion, in effect, on those arrangements. So bear with us. We just need to work through that, I think, make sure that we've got sufficient evidence to support the 23 position and then where you are now.
Okay, thank you. I can see Mark was always very Delphic. I interpreted that as fairly Delphic too.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much for. I hadn't appreciated your role in this, Janet. So thank you for explaining that at the beginning. And I'm always available if you want to have a. We haven't met, so
No.
if it was be helpful to have an informal meet, then please don't hesitate.
Thank you,
Otherwise,
John.
we'll leave you to your Delphic thinking.
Thank you.
You very much. And we look forward to this year being resolved by our next meeting. Thank you. The year we're talking about, I mean.
Quite, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to item 8, which is the statement of accounts and the annual governance statement. We have to approve something, which is the accounts. We have to review the governance statement, and we are being asked to delegate to me immaterial amendments that happen between today and whenever the thing is put to bed. And I'm told, do I have to have a vote, or can we just, if we get to that stage, we're all happy we do it, or do I have to have a formal vote? Okay, right. Well, when we get to that stage, I'll ask for a vote. I think it's the first time I've ever done that, but I'll take the legal instruction. Okay, good. Who's going to introduce?
Thank you, Chair. I will keep this brief. As we've been alluded to, the committee's received the draft 21-22 accounts before, and indeed since then the draft 22-23 accounts since then. You also had an update from our auditors in November with their interim results report, and have just heard that we're receiving an unqualified opinion on the statement of accounts for this one. EY have within that made 2 recommendations alongside their report. These are both around enhancing the controls within the combined authority around the statement of accounts. The first is the completion of the SIPFA checklist as part of our close down procedures. This is an optional checklist, but it's good practice just to make sure you've done everything. Clearly, with an unqualified opinion, they're of the opinion we have, but it will make their life and our life easier just to have done that. So we will be implementing that in future. The second was around the posting of journals to our general ledger, and that there's no oversight of journals being posted, or no review, I should say. Currently, the only people who can post journals are finance professionals within the finance team, but we will be looking at taking a risk-based approach so that high-value journals get reviewed before they're posted directly to the ledger going forwards. As I say, I'm not planning to rerun you all through the accounts, but Nick, Ian is online, and myself are here and happy to answer any questions you do have. As the chair's set out, your responsibilities are to review and approve the accounts themselves, review the annual governance statement, which is then signed off by the mayor and CEO following your review, and giving delegation to the chair, given there are those closing procedures that Janet referred to that still need to be completed so that the actual signature can be put on your behalf when we get those final closing procedures complete, which I think is due for the 7th of February. That was all I was planning to say, but happy to take questions.
Should we do the accounts first, and then we'll have a vote on it once we've had any comments? No comments? So can I have a vote on approval of the accounts? Andy's going to propose. And Simon will second. Okay. So those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. The annual governance statement, comments on the text or the shape or what isn't in it that should be in it? Any comments? I think you used up all your energy on the improvement report. That's what it was. Okay, so we've noted that then. We have no comments to make on the annual governance statement. And are we content that I sign off any further immaterial changes? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Nothing to say? No. Okay, we'll move on then. Thank you. Where am I? Item 9 is draft financial strategies. And we're asked to review and comment upon the draft capital investment and treasury management strategies for 24-25 and for the MRP for 24-25. And I noticed the changes are tracked. And perhaps you could introduce it and explain why we've got the changes.
Thank you. And just an apology to any members who are trying to pick this up over the weekend. I believe the initial set of appendices with track changes were actually sent out without track changes. But hopefully you received a circulated actually track changes version ahead of the meeting. These are key strategy documents which govern how the combined authority invests and manages its quite significant capital resources. And as part of good governance, we're required to review and reapprove these on an annual basis. And the committee's job is to comment on these and suggest to the combined authority where they need to be. There are 4 documents as part of this. The capital strategy is an overarching one. It's supposed to provide a high-level view. It's supposed to be aimed at members. So in particular, if that one doesn't make sense to you, please do highlight that because it clearly means we've missed the mark. And it sets out how the combined authority handles stewardship of public money to achieve value for money, sustainability, and affordability. There's then a couple of more specific ones. The Treasury Management Strategy sets out how the combined authority handles funding which it receives in advance of need. So we get a lot of our funding from government in April every year, but that's to spend over the course of the whole year. And between those 2 dates, we don't just leave it sitting in a bank account in case the bank goes bust. And that sets out what we do with that money to ensure that it's safe throughout the year and ready and available when we need to spend it. The one that's generally considered more interesting is now called the non-treasury investment strategy, just to make it really clear that they're different. And this covers two types of investments, one called service investment and one called commercial. Service investments, which the Combined Authority has, are those done to deliver service needs. So investments in our subsidiaries, giving out grants is considered an investment in this context. Anything where we're spending capital funding to deliver projects is considered within that area. And it sets out for those more complex arrangements where it's equity, where it's loans, how we make sure we make the right decision and are doing due diligence there, and sets out limits to make sure we don't overinvest and that we're doing things sensibly. That one also covers commercial investments. The Combined Authority doesn't have any, but those would be investments that are primarily for a financial return. So they might have a service outcome, but that's secondary to making a good return on investment. And that's something which CIPFA still says is fine for authorities to do, but it's not something the Combined Authority currently has any intention of doing. Finally, there's the Minimum Revenue Provision Statement, or MRP. This is making sure that where an authority has borrowed to deliver something, it's making a sensible amount of setting aside the money to repay that over time so that we're not left with a huge bill at the end of it. The current draft medium-term financial plan that's going to the board next week, that has no borrowing anticipated across it. And so while we won't have to set any money aside unless something else comes up, we're required to set out how we would do it if it did. And certainly there are big changes in the authority potentially coming up, such as franchising or future devolution, that may cause a change in whether there's borrowing intended. And so this says how we do it to make sure we do it in an appropriate manner. You've heard already today about the significant changes to the Combined Authority and how we operate over the last 12 to 18 months. But the underlying business of the authority, what we were established to do, hasn't significantly changed since, well, the current year, in fact. And that's reflected in there aren't really any big changes to the strategies that are before you compared to the ones that those of you who've been here for a year saw last year. It's been updated. The numbers reflect the new MTFP. They'll be updated again following next week when we have an approved new budget. It's also made reference to the new single assurance framework that was approved towards the end of last year rather than the older assurance framework. And it reflects new funding announcements and decisions. There are two specific changes I'd highlight to the committee within the four documents. One really is around a maturity of the Combined Authority as a whole. In the new MTFP that's going to the board next week, there's actually a number of funds that are set up across active travel, climate, business growth, and levelling up. These aren't allocated to specific projects as has been done in the past. They're thematic, and the Combined Authority Board will be setting assessment criteria and selection criteria for those funds, which projects can then bid into, will be assessed on those specific fund criteria, and then awarded money or not. That's quite a change to how it's operated in the past, and the impact on these statements is that for those funds, we don't know whether they'll be given out as grants, as loans, as equity. It depends which projects come forward and are successful. And in particular, on the levelling up and business growth areas, there's, looking at the past, a fair likelihood that some of those won't be given out as grant. And so the limits within the capital strategy and the non-treasury investment strategy have been set at a level to allow the flexibility within those two funds for them to be awarded in whatever way the board and the organisation sees fit, without having to come back and say, we weren't sure what we were going to do, so we set them too low and now we need to break them. The second is around environmental, social and governance policy, so ESG. It's particularly around treasury management. The key criteria for treasury management investments is security and liquidity. So making sure the money's there when we need it and doesn't go bust, we don't lose it. And that will continue. But more and more local authorities are pushing to, when they give their money out to some other entity for 6 months, to make sure that that money is used in a way that has a positive benefit on the world. And now that the private sector is catching up with that desire, because the local authority market nationally is quite large, it's got a lot of assets over the course of a year. And so there's coming online now more funds with defined ESG credentials, and there's actually one out there that I think is referenced in the report that we're setting up now that offers a competitive rate of return with a good enough security and liquidity to meet our treasury management criteria. So we will be trying to focus on that where we can over the new year. That's about it in terms of the updates. They are fairly minor, but happy to take any questions the committee have on them.
Okay, before I ask a question, I just confirm I've got track changes from page 196 onwards, which is the capital strategy report. Is that where we should start seeing the track changes? But bearing in mind you said that we didn't get them all before. Well, in the pack, 196.
Yes,
capital strategy report.
that's correct.
So no changes
before that. No, that's been reissued on.
Colleagues, we are.
Well, actually, not an awful lot to say, but I just think, as you say, they're fairly minor changes. But I think it's good to see that, let's say, the maturity of the authority, and particularly as you were explaining earlier with those funds with the theme. Can't remember the term now, but the thematic funds. So I've not got any comments in terms of things I'd like to see differently, but I'm just pleased with what we're seeing in the progress that's been made.
Thank you, Mark. Any other? Alison?
That may just be that my experience here is obviously limited, but in terms of things, obviously CIPFA provide an awful lot of guidance. The Treasury Management Code, for example, how do all of these policies fit in? Are they fully compliant? Do they take the sort of templates provided by CIPFA and use those, or have they been fully developed outside of that?
We employ a treasury management consultancy firm called Arling Close, which are used widely throughout the local authority market. They take the CIPFA guidance and then issue template documents for these. We then obviously personalize them and localize them to the combined authority. So in short, yes, they are fully aligned with the CIPFA requirements.
Thank you. If there are no more comments, can I just say a couple of things, if that's okay? Thank you. I think the first of which is that I think, as Rob rightly said, this is looking at the return, as one of the very wise FDs said to me many years ago as a trainee. It's the return of our money rather than the return on our money that's important in terms of treasury management. However, the return itself, still doing that, has not been insignificant this year. And I think it's worth noting that we've achieved, I think, around about £8.5 million of income more than was first anticipated, while still being very prudent in terms of our investments, and that income has been put to a whole set of very good uses approved by the board over the course of the last few months, which have been very much around, much of it frontline service. And the second thing for me, I just think at this stage it would be wrong of me, Chair, not to thank colleagues, particularly those in finance, Rob on my right, Ian Pantling, who's with us as well, and the wider finance team, not just for this work on treasury management, but also for the final accounts that we saw previously. And I would just like to, in this public forum, if I may, please give me that opportunity, just to say a big thank you to them for that huge amount of work and effort that's gone in over the course of the last year or so in terms of getting these things resolved. Thank you.
I see lots of nods to those last remarks from members. Good. I don't see any other comments though, so thank you very much for that. And it's the importance of track changes focuses our minds, which is very helpful. Thank you. Okay, the next item is the internal audit progress report. I think we have online Nick Fanning from RSM.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning. Still morning.
Just about.
And we are to note note and comment on the update. Nick, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce.
No, thank you, Chair. So our paper today is the internal audit progress report. This commences, I believe, on page 228 of the committee pack. I'd like to draw out some key points from the document and then happy to take any questions on the content. The first point to raise was in regards to progress of 23-24. So in summary, we've finalised 2 further reports since the last committee, which we've touched upon already in certain areas of the schedule today. The first report was risk management, and the second report on the project planning and delivery work stream of the improvement plan. So in summary, on the 2 reports, the risk management report was a split opinion, so very much reflecting what Chris covered in his section. A positive assessment on the design of the control framework and a negative partial assurance on the application and compliance. Informing that opinion, this reflected the improvements made to the design of the control framework since we last looked at the area. So positive from that perspective. And then again, I think probably reflecting Chris's report, just the need to ensure the content and comprehensiveness of the risk content across all risk registers is sufficient. And that appears to be the current focus of the authorities. So actions are in place, and I can see those have been taken forward as per Chris's papers earlier today. The second report was a positive assurance opinion, reasonably assured upon in regards to project planning and delivery improvement plan report. I think it's a pleasing report, and a key point to note was this was the second tranche of work on the improvement plan, both of which have come out with positive assurance ratings, which I think aligns again to Angela's update. And again, happy to see our actions are in that report and taken forward already. We've also included the report summaries for your information on page 4 and 5 of our paper in regards to the 2 reports. In regards to the remaining schedule for 23-24, we've got 3 further reports out in draft already, 1 review in progress and 1 further review, which is commencing in February. Just a key point on that document you'll see is the request by management to remove the HR digital processes audit from the programme for this year. This is due to the process of procurement for a replacement HR system. It was felt the audit wouldn't be of any value, noting the issues would have been identified, and hence the move to replace the system. A key update to that narrative in the report was I spoke with Nick earlier this week to discuss potential replacements for that audit in 23-24. And we did discuss looking at a further tranche of improvement plan work and to focus on the procurement work stream, so to replicate our work on the previous 2 work streams and deliver an audit in that area within 23-24. We would ask, obviously, for confirmation from the committee they're happy with that revised approach, but we can obviously pick that up in the questioning at the end of the summary. The final point I wanted to raise was just in regards to the draft head of audit opinion. Of course, that's been negative in previous years. Just looking at the progress to date, there's been sort of 3.5 positive reports out of the 4 finalised to date. So at present, there's no concerns over a negative overall head of audit opinion. Of course, there's a caveat, there's remaining work to complete and reports to be finalised, but we're pretty happy with progress this year. Happy to pause now to take any questions on the paper and to specifically ask the committee in regards to approval of the change of the plan as highlighted above.
Thank you very much, Nick. Nick, do you want to say anything before I open it up?
Merely to say again, Chair, that just to reinforce that last point there, we felt there was absolutely no point doing an internal audit on a system we're about to change. And we'd rather do the work on the system after it's been changed. And therefore, that audit we have proposed to say that we look at further work to finalise the improvement programme that builds on the 2 internal audits already been done. Other than that, I think progress is very good. And we continue to focus in terms of, we talked about previously on the internal audit tracker, making sure that the recommendations that come through on the various audits are implemented as rapidly as we can.
Thank you. Right, colleagues, comments, questions? Are you happy with the change to the plan? I see nods. Okay, I've got one question then, which you've nicely highlighted regarding the annual opinion. There is a sort of a timing conundrum from the point of view of the committee, because we will be looking at our annual report at our last meeting of this municipal year, which is in March. And I know that historically we don't get the internal audit opinion till a month or two later. So as it says in on your page 235, it would be very helpful in the update we get in March if you could put more certainty into what I've interpreted as it is going to be a positive, and at least we could then put in our report that that's what the weather forecast looks like. So the best you can do in March on firming up what your opinion is likely to be, that would be very helpful to the committee.
No, of course, Chair. And with those 3 reports in draft, if we turn those around pretty quickly ahead of that committee, we can draft a head of audit opinion. So you have a draft head of audit opinion at the next committee, which would be ahead of previous schedules. So that's all being well on finalising those 3 draft reports.
Okay, good, thank you. And I do sense, and you've touched on it then, that the progress against the plan has been better this year than we've had hitherto. Would that be your opinion?
I would agree. I mean, of course, I've only been your IA manager for the last kind of sort of nine to 10 months. I picked up the end of last year and came into this year. So I think we had a big push this year to get a more front-ended program, and of course, going into next year, exactly the same approach. Engagement's improved certainly since I've been involved from my perspective. So that's a key point from an IA perspective. If engagement's good, then that helps us progress the plan timely. So sort of positives from that perspective.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And we've noted and we very much welcome the fact that the timetable is more sooner than we've had before. We keep at it. We'll finish now, then you can go and finish off those 4 reports. Okay.
Of course, no problem. Thank you all.
Right. We now move on to item 11, sorry, the Code of Conduct Lessons Learned. Edwina and I, Auditing Officer and I, had a conversation at the beginning, before the meeting started. As you can see from the words in the report, what this is, Edwina is in her paper, as she'd explain, is trying to garner our opinions and views so that we can have a second bite of this topic. And all members will maybe not, I'm not sure if Alison got it, but yesterday we had a thoughtful input that sent to all of the members from a member of the CA board, Councillor Bailey, quite extensive comment designed to help us in our role. But this isn't a paper that is public, and it needs some time for assimilation. So we can refer to the ideas in there when we discuss it, but I think where we'll end up is having given the monitoring officer sense of where we think we want to be in producing a report on the lessons learned, not so much about what happened in the specifics of the case, but was the process is okay? What are our views on sanctions? I think which is particularly important that we have a view. We'd start it now and develop it later, and then the particulars of what might be appropriate to recommend being amended in the Constitution. So I hope I haven't stolen all your sandwiches, but I thought I'd put it in context before we started. Edwina.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Good morning, committee. As the chair has said, we've really come to the committee today to get your views on the next stage with regard to the Constitution, or the section in the Constitution that deals with the Code of Conduct and panel hearings, and whether that needs to be amended, whether further work needs to be done. So the report really focuses on lessons learned from the recently determined code of conduct investigation. As this committee is aware, there was a subcommittee that was formed from this parent committee, which met on the 17th of November and made a final decision. And as the chair has mentioned, there was an email sent from Councillor Bailey. I just wanted to pause to check that everyone received that email. Thank you. I've also not included in my report any comments on the process because the process that was followed mirrors the requirements in the Constitution and the law, but just verbally to update the committee and explain the whole process. So when the complaints were made, an assessment was done by the previous monitoring officer. They consulted with the CPCA's independent person. So the CPCA has two independent persons, and their role is to give their views on code of conduct complaints. This is sort of a check and balance situation. So the monitoring officer is not just making decisions on their own. They're totally independent of the authority. They don't work for the authority. They don't have any political affiliations. They're independent, and that the two independent persons, I believe, were appointed by this committee in June 2021. So the previous monitoring officer consulted with one of those independent persons, and they both agreed that the complaints should be investigated. Following which, the previous MO then commissioned an independent investigator to carry out the investigations. The independent investigator interviewed the complainants and others, asked for several documents before a decision was made. Once that decision was made, it was then passed on to me as the new monitoring officer at the time. I then assessed the decision and consulted with an independent person. We both agreed that the matter should be referred to a hearing panel, which was the panel that took place on the 14th of November. So that's the whole process. It mirrored very closely what the Constitution required. All through the process, the investigator, completing his investigation, provided updates to the complainants. Once I got the final decision on the same day, I emailed it out to the complainants, so they had copies of the final decision on the same day, and I provided updates at intervals. For instance, telling them the date of the hearing. So that's how the whole process worked. I can also confirm that following the publishing of the decision notice, what was resolved by the panel has been completed by the mayor. So you would have seen the decision notice. The decision notice has 3 annexes, the apology, and so all of that has been done. So I can come back and say to this committee that what you asked the mayor to do has been done. In addition, a code of conduct development session took place on 6th of December, which was attended by the mayor and other members, and that session basically just dealt with the code of conduct and how it's relevant to day-to-day issues. So if I turn now to the report itself, the lessons learned are stated in the report. I really don't want to go through all of it unless you prefer for me to go through all of it. The issue about sanctions, I think maybe I just need to expand on that a bit. The sanctions that were available to the panel are the sanctions contained in the Constitution. The panel doesn't have additional powers to go above and beyond those sanctions. There is no legislation that sets out or prescribes sanctions that are applicable in code of conduct complaint situations. So basically, each authority is left to decide the sanctions available to it within a limit, because the government basically say there's some sanctions that you can't impose, for example, disqualifying a member, asking a member to resign. So the panel was limited to what was contained in the Constitution. And one of the asks today is whether the committee wants me as the monitoring officer to have a look and think about whether there are other sanctions that may be available in other authorities that you think you may want to consider. Obviously, like I said, subject and limited to legislation, the things that legislation doesn't permit. So I think that's the only matter item that I really wanted to highlight. The others are set out in there. I will pause here and take questions. Thank you, Chair.
All right, there we go. Before I ask for comments, I think we're trying to think about process and whether the constitution worked or needs to be adjusted, and it's. I don't think it's difficult in one's mind to separate the case, but it's the process we should be focusing on, not the case, and some of its mechanics, some of its perception and criticism because it took so long, and readers' paper touches on the why that was so, but there is the more contentious issue of sanctions, and if one were to be critical of the suite of sanctions that are available to us, then we have to come up with some ideas of what sanctions we would like, additional or different. And if we are minded in this process to make any recommendations that is either within the power of the authority or the need for the authority to make representation to London, I mean, this has to be soundly thought through, and I think this is an opportunity to have a first go on the sanctions issue in the way that people think, and then does the constitution require any adjustment, either in minor, and we've had some proposals which are not on the table now, but on wording, which need to be considered. The ones, because it's advice from or a view from a board member, so it's that's important in itself. But we might have our own judgments as well. So, with all of that preamble, who would like to start? Can we do Mark? That's because you've got 12 minutes.
Yeah, so I was just going to address the sanctions point because there are two aspects to it. There is, let's say that there's one that we can actively do something about, which I think and potentially make changes to the constitution, which is to understand within the current legislative framework, are there sanctions that other authorities have in their constitutions that we haven't considered? And I think that would be very useful if the monitoring officer would be able to investigate that and to come back to the committee on that, and we can then review whether we think those would merit bringing into the constitution. Unless I struggle a bit with the other side, which is of us thinking of a whole range of sanctions that currently aren't legal today and making representations to the government. I'm not sure how useful our time is spent on that, because I think as one authority and actually as one committee in an authority taking those things forward, I suspect we're going to make very little impact. So I'm not convinced that's particularly useful, particularly good use of our time. But I think it is good. It would be really useful to understand if there are other sanctions that our constitution prevents us from using at the moment that we could bring within the scope of that.
Thank you. Any other comments on that before I ask Edwina to?
Yeah, I think it's basically agreeing with Mark there as well. So I went through sort of looking at what sanctions we've got there, and it's understanding almost like a benchmark against what other authorities use as sanctions, and if they are appropriate to us as well. So I think it would be very worthwhile to understand those, look at those, and bring them back to the committee to go through. Yeah.
Do you want to on that particular thing?
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment about the issue of whether to write to the government or not. Obviously, it's a matter for this committee, but just to say that the government did consult with a range of local authorities and the Committee on Standards in Public Life as well responded to the consultation. And the government came back and said, no, we're not changing the sanctions. We don't think that local authorities should police politicians in a nutshell, not their words, my words. But yeah, so it is up to this committee to make that decision. But as I said,
A board in this area, it needs to be that we have considered it, and we have to have a view as to whether we recommend that they take this up with Whitehall. When I went to staff college, you used to get the scenario was in white paper and the answer was on pink paper, and nobody liked the scenario because they'd always want to change it to get the answer they wanted. But the rubric was don't fight the white. You are where you are, and I think I sense that's a mood of the conversation so far.
Just, I think, make a comment on the process, which I think is actually probably the more important issue. Being on the panel, and I can like Mark to comment. I cannot think it was anything more than rigorous. There were so many checks and balances in that. I was very confident that there was a considered, evidence-based, balanced, sound judgments.
And I mean, if that is our view, I don't see any dissembling. But this is what we should say in the lessons learned. We've looked at this. We found that the process was, with your analysis, that the process was appropriate, except maybe for time. And I know that we can come back with Mark. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the time pod is frustrating that it took so long, but I absolutely agree that, and maybe I just say that, as I said at the committee, the subcommittee, the investigator that we used was known to me because it was a monitoring officer on a previous authority I served on. Yeah. But if I I think I'm being objective by saying he did an extremely professional job, as did the officers of the combined authority involved in that. So I think it was, yeah, and the independent person as well. Yes, I think all of those people played a very sort of professional role, and I think that really helped the process.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you can't argue that the process was rigorous. You can't argue that the way it was handled was highly professional. It left us, though, with a feeling of a lack of options. Lack of options in terms of reporting because of the sensitivities around the material. And I'm sure that will continue with any other cases that are there. And these lack of options in terms of sanctions, because we only had a very few that we could choose from, and that we are constrained in that. So what I come back to is, I think where the problem lies that we could fix, rather than trying to find a sanction that may not be supported by anyone, is how we manage these things and how we manage them early enough, and who it is that should be focusing on the incidents that are taking place. And the one thing I took away from it, again, I won't go into details, but there's an opportunity for things to go wrong for a fair period of time that should have been picked up earlier and should have been dealt with more quickly, and probably wouldn't have needed to come to this stage had those processes been rigorous enough. So I think what we're doing is probably looking at the tail of the donkey, not the donkey itself. We need to get that right. And I think what we should be doing is to make sure whatever form of process we have in our internal investigations are far better and far quicker, so that when something comes up to the level of the panel to look at a particular case, all the other necessary items have been dealt with much more quickly. I think we are very much constrained on what we can say. I know there's a lot of feedback about you weren't very clear on the process. You didn't give enough information about what had happened. A lot of criticism about that. But we are constrained by the process. We have to accept that. Equally, people can be very pointed about what they think sanctions would be appropriate. But if we are again constrained, I think we have to be very clear that whatever issues happen and when things go wrong, it's the speed at which you can identify it and deal with it that is far more important in my mind than a process right at the end of the game. So that would be my view, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sort of rewinding to the sanctions, but also, I suppose, the process. I mean, if it seems to me that alignment with the other local authorities in the area is quite an important thing, because otherwise, given that, you know, I mean, I've got two hats here, but some have got three, that you'd be inserting a sort of extra stage in any process if you had to decide, you know, which was the most favourable from either party's point of view set of rules under which to be judged. So it seemed to me that alignment is almost more important than what the particular sanctions are. And I suppose, is that something which Councillor Bailey touched in her letter, that, I mean, if alignment means talking to central government, then maybe that's an argument for writing a letter, but probably only having first consulted with our other local constituent authorities. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Chair. There is a model code of conduct that's been prepared by the LGA, and that's what a lot of local authorities are adopting. And that's one of the asks today, if you're happy for me to, or if I get the permission from this committee to go and look at that bit of the code of conduct, I can return with the LGA model code of conduct and put that alongside our code of conduct. And that, I think, might be the best code of conduct to benchmark against, because that's what most local authorities in the land are adopting.
Yeah, I wonder whether I mean, with the committee, we took soundings with the other combined authorities. So maybe we could also see what other combined authorities use as their sanctions list, because it seems to me there's a confidence issue here, that there's some one senses in the bazaars some negative opinion about the sanctions, negative opinion about timing, and less about the process. But what we're trying to do here, I think, is learn and also provide confidence and assurance that we thought about it properly, and that it's robust within the legal framework in which we have to operate. That would seem to be an objective we should be aiming for, and timing is less important. But
Thank you, Chair. You know, I was just thinking there was an opportunity this morning as we were meeting here to go to another meeting where all of the chairs and vice chairs of all the variety of committees across combined authorities could have had a very valuable discussion here, and we would have probably been the people being asked our opinion, so that they could then share that right the way across the country. And I think that's perhaps a forum we should approach as for us as committee chairs, to try and get some sense of where we should be on this.
So I'd like to just emphasise the point that Councillor Coles made, actually, which was the prevention of the problem in the first place, and that I think we can now be confident that there is a much more supportive whistleblowing type of arrangement, and that the culture of the organisation is supportive of identifying problems as they emerge, rather than them escalating to the point where we had very serious reputational risk. to it. So I think in the feedback, I just wanted to pick up that point that was made by Councillor Coles and say, yeah, I think that we really do need to emphasise that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Out of this discussion, thank you, Mark. As Chief Executive Investigator, thank you very much for being with us. Always top notch. So Edwina will come back at the next meeting with some thoughts. I think timing is less important than getting it right. I mean, there's a downside in the sense that we won't finish it this municipal year, and who knows, we'll be sitting around the table, or I will. But do I have your support that timing is less important than getting the thinking through? Okay. So if you could come back to the next meeting with as much as you can muster from this conversation and some suggestions of what we might feed back to the Combined Authority Board, we'll have another look at it. But if we need more time to work on it, we will. Sorry, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a couple of other points in there because I know. Yes. Councillor Bailey's email did highlight a couple of sort of suggestions on terms of the process in there that I'd actually noted down before as well here. So I don't know if we want to go through those again as I moved on from sanctions to process.
I don't think. Well, I mean, I'm sorry. You're quite right. And we also, in your next report, take on board the comments that have been provided by a Combined Authority Board member, and report back to us those that you feel that if it's straightforward, just do it. If you've got any concerns about contention, then ask us for our views. Okay. Thank you. We're going on to item 12, which is the annual complaints report, an update on complaints against members.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to apologise. There's a typo in paragraph 3.2. There's an S missing after the word complaint, so I do apologise. It should have read complaints. So this report focuses on the number of code of conduct complaints against members received so far within the review period. And I have to explain about the review period. So the review period is sort of looking back and looking forward. So you will note that the review period starts in June last year, the municipal year, when the municipal year started last year, and it goes all to the way up until May. But obviously we're in January, so there are a few more months before the end of the review period. But the reason why I brought this report to this committee is last year when you agreed your work program, you asked for this report to come to its January meeting. And if I recall, I believe the reason for that was because you wanted to have an opportunity to put forward any proposals to the board and for me to come back to your last meeting in March. Usually your last meeting is in March before the pre-election period. So that's the reason why it's kind of it seems premature to bring it here, but there's a reason behind that, and it's one that the committee wanted. So with the approval of the committee, I can come back at the first meeting of the next municipal year and provide any further updates if there have been further complaints. Obviously, looking back to the end of May 2023. So if I the report, I think, is quite self-explanatory. There are 4 ongoing code of conduct complaints. One is a legacy complaint, so that's a complaint that was made to the previous monitoring officer before I joined, and that's still ongoing. And there are 3 new complaints that have come in recently. All the 4 complaints have been made by members against members, obviously for data protection, I will not disclose the names of the members. It's my firm view as a monitoring officer for fair, to have a fair process. You should keep the names of subject members confidential until there has been a decision that a breach has occurred. Otherwise, what you do is you expose a member who may, at the end of the process, not be adjudged to breach the code of conduct, to unnecessary criticism and stress. And yeah, so that's my firm view, and I believe also complies with data protection rules. So until there is a final decision, the names of the members will be kept confidential. As I said earlier, there's been a code of conduct development session that was attended by a lot of members, including the chair, which dealt with code of conduct, how it relates to everyday life, standards and ethics and behaviors expected from members. We are hoping to run the same program in June this year, and it will be a yearly program. So we hope that carries on for as long as possible, really. So there isn't anything much to add to this. Everything's in the report, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Comments? Questions? My recollection is we've not, until this report, on the case that's just been concluded, but hitherto we haven't had this this level of incidence. And I wondered if there's anything you could share about that.
It is difficult for me to go into detail because of confidentiality, but yes, you're correct, Chair. We haven't had this level of complaints, and which is one of the reasons this report has been brought. One of the asks is for you to note the trend and whether there were any comments that you wanted to make about that. But I think what I would say is, apart from the one legacy complaint, the three reports kind of center around the same issue. I think that's as far as I can go.
Okay, thank you. Gary?
Yes, I was just wondering,
Yes, I can certainly arrange that. But for today's purposes, I can say that the legacy report is just waiting to have the the view of the independent person back. So the one legacy one as to how the matter should be dealt with. And the other three were just they're quite recent. So just going through the assessment stage as to what the next stage should be. Thank you.
I mean, when we think about talking about behaviours and culture, this is a different lens in the prism, isn't it? This is an annual report, but given the trend, would it be appropriate to have a 6-month update, or what do you? It's just. I don't know whether this is worrying or not. I suppose that's what I'm trying to feel for.
Chair, if I may, I think audit and governance in other places, it's a regular report. I think maybe an exception report in this case would be better, that if there is something that's come up between now and the next meeting, then it can be reported, because it may be a more quick response would be better than just waiting for a 6-monthly period.
Well, I'm just hoping that this isn't beginning of a trend or becoming a cultural norm that we're going to see a sea of member-on-member complaints because it's going to clog up the system somewhat, isn't it? We're having to go through an assessment, the independent person, and so on and so forth. And I'm just wondering whether there'll be other interventions that might address the problem before it gets out of hand.
We'll talk to those two. Identifying the trend. We'll do those bits and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, usually it's a yearly report, but I'm happy to bring updates to the committee if there are high numbers of complaints or significantly higher number of complaints that would usually be. Yes, I am happy to do that, but usually it's a yearly report because there are usually many reports. And to respond to how audit and governance committee can intervene, as this committee is responsible for member behavior and standards, you may perhaps want to consider maybe having regular meetings with members just to sort of talk through governance and any issues. That's one thing. In other authorities that have been in, I know that, for example, mediation sometimes has been arranged between members of political parties. And that may be something that you may want to consider being involved with. And I have seen it actually worked. Also, sometimes you maybe away days. It sounds ridiculous, but I have seen it work because sometimes just members just been away and sort of facilitated by this committee where all the members of the CPCA attend, and you kind of take people into separate rooms to have conversations with them and kind of try to loosen knotty issues. I have seen it work in other places. So um, I mean, the other thing you could do, which is formal, which would be to make recommendations to the board. That's the other thing you could do. For example, recommendations about whether it's compulsory for members who want to sit on any committee to attend X amount of training sessions per year, or all members have to attend code of conduct training sessions. But that's a formal thing, and I'm not sure how well received that will be. But those are sort of the suggestions that I can put forward to the committee.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think having the annual report is not often enough, and I think exactly the sort of points that Councillor Smith is making, to be able to look at trends in there. I would like to see this kind of information coming to us on a regular basis in there, because as you said, the interventions that we're talking about is there. We can only look at taking those interventions if we believe there is a trend happening. There is no point in putting them in place if there isn't a trend happening in there. So for me personally, I mean, it's only a small item. Maybe if we could even sort of propose bringing it to each meeting, so we just sort of see how, again, against the timeliness and against our process, is it being effectively used. Thank you.
So thank you. Don't want to get in the way of Casimir's comments, but it just strikes me that often these issues take a little while to resolve, and therefore bringing it back every time that we have a meeting may be slightly too often to see any real trends through there. You may want to consider it maybe initially on a 6-monthly basis, because I think by that stage you will start to see any trends that come through. And you may wish to go and think this may be a blip, which I've seen in other organisations, as opposed to a longer term systemic issue. If it's the latter, it's of course significantly more concerning. If it's a blip, then it should resolve itself out. I don't know which of those it will be at the moment.
Simon?
Well, I think this discussion takes us back to the improvement framework report and talking about consensus building and having a mature and progressive combined authority. So, if, on the one hand, we're saying we want to take people into safe spaces to work and have reasoned discussion and reach consensus. And on the other hand, they're trying to kick lumps out of each other by making formal complaints. These two things just don't sit together. And Edwin, I think that your comments are incredibly helpful because you're saying there's another way of dealing with this through mediation and bringing people together. And I think that needs to be written back into the improvement framework as a tool that you have to develop greater maturity in this organisation amongst members, or some members, not this committee, obviously.
Thank you. I think we're sort of trying to make things up on the hoof here, and it's probably not the most helpful way to do it. I was just going back to my donkey, if you like, and I'm thinking, I want to know that officers, where there is an issue, have identified it early on and are dealing with it, rather than be in the situation where we have another requirement for a panel. So how on earth you can reflect that in this particular thing, I don't know.
One more to go before information governance. We've got the review of committee arrangements, which Nick Bell, and we're asked to note the outcome, approve that there will be an annual review of members of the Audit and Governance Committee of the arrangements for that committee in sufficient time for any proposed changes, and to talk about a form of chairs and vice chairs.
Thank you. I'll be relatively brief in this one because hopefully the content is very well recognised by the majority of the members of the committee here today. This all stemmed from the report that I brought to September Audit and Governance Committee, looking at the benchmarking against other audit and governance committees of other male combined authorities. Following on from that, we issued a questionnaire to members of the committee to get their views. Thank you to those returning that. And then a workshop as well, looking at the final options for us to move forward. Hopefully I've captured the various issues that came up from those questions in blue, for those who can see this in colour, within the attached report. In summary, I think it's fairly much sort of steady as we go in terms of the key issues that were raised through there, with, I think, the issue that deep dives were mentioned. And I think a sense that deep dives probably should be continued, but as part of the main committee rather than outside of that. That, as the chair rightly mentions, there should be a clear link in relation to a new forum to be established with male combined authorities for the chair and the vice chair to share best practice in the future, and that we should instigate that annual review that will come through on a regular basis with sufficient time for any changes to come before the start of the new municipal year every late May. Subject to that, Chair, the only other point I would mention is something that came up, which I've asked the committee just to think about in terms of point 214 in the future rather than now, is about how proactive the committee should be in terms of seeking out further areas of improvement once we get beyond the current improvement programme, as opposed to merely checking the work that's been undertaken by officers and the executive within the organisation. I think an interesting maybe discussion point for your, not now necessarily, but maybe for your next review in relation to this area as well. I'll leave it at that, Chair. Happy to take any comments.
Thank you, Nick. Comments? Could you just remind me what we're meaning by the annual review?
Thank you, Chair. I envisage, we're asking all committees really to undertake an annual review. I envisage the annual review for this committee will be similar to the one that we've just gone through. That'll be a quick look, and of course at that stage it could be yourself and the vice chair working with the vice chairs, the other MCAs, male combined authorities, in terms of what's happening within those individual areas, and for you to then think about actually are there any changes that you would want to bring in place, supported by the officers, around the way that the Audit and Governance Committee operates in the future. That to me will be the annual review that comes through, just to make sure that the work that of this committee remains linked to best practice for other Audit and Governance committees across the country. In sufficient time for it to be done and recommendations to come through for the constitutional changes. So I would suggest that it's a process you probably kick off in the autumn of 2024 and then conclude sometime around January again, 2025. And just do that on a rolling basis. It doesn't need to take an awful lot of time, Chair, but I think it is good practice to do that on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. And that one, we'll put that in the work programme. Are we content? Sorry, I wasn't broadcasting. Okay, and thank you, Nick, for the work that's gone into that. We've learnt a lot, I think, out of, even if it's only reassurance, looking at the ways it's done across the various parishes. Thank you. Sue is going to introduce it. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The report is the Information Governance Report, which is a yearly update report. I'm Sue Hall, the Data Protection Officer, and the report just generally is just to give you an update on some of the work that we've been doing within the team. So FOIs, just gives you a flavour of how many we're getting per year and the types of requests that we're receiving. Environmental information regulations, we don't generally get that many of those, had none this year. Data breaches, just to give you a flavour again of some of the types of breaches that have actually occurred within the combined authority. Corporate complaints, we've only had 2 level 2 complaints. And then just to give you an information risk group meeting, which is a meeting we hold on a monthly basis. And then just some information about some other work that is happening within the team. We did this cyber security data protection training, which we've rolled out to the Audit and Governance Committee. There's a big project that's been ongoing, which we've been involved in with the SharePoint and the redesign of the actual storage of our documents, plus the physical documents as well. and then we're going to be doing a logging of all complaints. We're going to be looking at that. We've already just started that particular project. At the moment, we only actually bring to audit and governance the level 2 complaints, which are the ones that come through the monitoring officer. But we're looking to encompass our reports with all the level 1 complaints as well, which will be all complaints within the that we receive within the company. So hopefully next year, that's what the report will contain. That's my report. If there's any questions, anybody?
Thank you very much, Sue. Colleagues?
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, of all the FOIs that you get, how much would you say would be complaint nature, and those would be of exploring information mainly for press purposes or other purposes? Yeah. What sort of balance do you see in terms of the requests?
In terms of ones from the press, we probably get about 3 or 4 a year that are from press or communication type channels. We get some that are from researchers. We get some that are from local groups, you know, the type of the action groups. We get a couple from those. And then we get probably a couple again of ones that maybe sort of like the complaints in terms of like transport, and so they're questioning bus timetables and that type of thing. So it's a mixture, really.
Thank you. And in terms of your findings, does that then go into a communication strategy debate to see whether actually it should form part of a regular output to people through comms?
So at the moment, it's reported to the performance report, which is pulled together by the policy team, and they pull together all the reports. But in terms of communication, we don't actually we haven't actually done anything that pulls together looking at FOIs as a whole and to see if there's any communication that needs to be carried out. If there is one that comes in that would need that, then I would go to that team for their response anyway. So it would be highlighted then.
Thanks. I'm just thinking with the transparency hat on whether actually we've missed something and that's why you're getting it all.
So in terms of all of our transparency, they're all put on the website, so people can see all of the responses to our actual FOIs. Okay.
Any other? Okay. Thanks, Sue. And is this annually? The years seem to fly by. It was only 10 minutes ago you were here. Okay.
It's gone
Thank
very
you.
quick.
And maybe then just that point in future reports, that balance between information seeking and something that looks slightly more aggressive would be an additional insight. But thank you very much. Sorry to false start you. All right. And
Sorry, I just wanted to say publicly, thank you to Sue because she's our new data protection manager and she has, it's quite a lot of work when you see the figures, but sometimes the documents, they're some that we're looking at documents over 1 million documents, and she's managed to just sort of keep calm and carry on. So yeah, thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Edwina.
we now come to what you could argue is cold toast to the work programme for 23-24, because we've only got one meeting to go. So when will we see next? Can we see at the next meeting the intentions for 20? Because we have discussed before that we should use the last meeting before the end of the municipal year to be looking forward for how many, when we were doing the reviews, for how many meetings we should plan in a year, and if we could see the work program as it would normally be at next month, we'll be able to take a view as to whether it needs to be adjusted. And I'm not sure if we have any ideas about development sessions, but if they could put those in as well. And I think we're undecided whether we have 5 or 6 meetings. And I don't know whether the thought is to have 5 scheduled and 1 reserved. Do we have a view on this? Because if we don't get it in the diaries, we'll never get it, will we? So could you think about that? And yeah, because I think 4 is too, has always been too few. We shouldn't really need 6, but who knows what's on the horizon? Sorry, let's.
Just the draft municipal timetable is going to the board next week, and I believe that we've checked with members in terms of initial dates around us for next year.
Just one tiny point, Chair, and that's the date of this meeting seems not to be the same as the one on the work programme. Just want to change that so that it's accurate. Thanks.
That's because we slipped it in the hope, the unsatisfied hope that we would get an external audit opinion on VFM. So thank you for bearing with that last minute change in your diaries for a hope that never arrived. Okay, on that basis, I will. Our next meeting is the 8th of March, and on that basis, I close the meeting at, how am I doing? Doing pretty well, 12:32. Thank you.